Good morning. This is Patrick Allen from Kent State University Center for Corporate and Professional Development. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar. In this webinar, we will discuss various aspects that will help make a Lean Six Sigma initiative successful. We are joined today by Kent State Lean Six Sigma facilitators and also members of the Kent State staff. At the end, we will address questions, any questions that you might have. So next, I would like to introduce Bob Skillman. Bob Skillman is a Six Sigma Master Black Belt that was trained by Motorola. He has a lot of years experience not only teaching these programs, but also putting them into use. Bob has been with us since our very beginning of the Lean Six Sigma programs here at Kent State. Next, I would like to introduce John Novak. He also is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt with degrees in Industrial Technology from Bowling Green and an MBA here from Kent State. And again, he also has a lot of experience, not just teaching these programs, but also putting it to use in various industries. And Steve Skillman, again, is a Master Black Belt with a bachelor's degree in Business Administration and has a lot of experience in various industries also, and is one of our main Black Belt facilitators. So next I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John Novak, who will begin the presentation.
Thanks, Patrick. I'd like to start this webinar by presenting you with a few quotes to start making the case for implementing and maintaining an organization-wide continual improvement program. And this is where we get all employees engaged in the process. Insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. This is an Albert Einstein quote that exemplifies how many organizations embrace the status quo and shy away from change while at the same time expecting improved results. Einstein was right. This is insanity. Next, it's not necessary to change. Survival is not mandatory. This is a Deming quote, Dr. Deming, and this exemplifies the result of not embracing change. If we stick with the status quo, we lose competitiveness, profitability, and ultimately our business. Is this where we really want to go? I don't think so. And lastly, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. This Albert Einstein quote sets the stage for continual improvement. He is telling us that in order to solve problems and improve our business processes, we have to think differently.
Satisfied employees make a difference. What do you think? Here's what I think. Have you ever worked with a truly satisfied employee, somebody that takes pride and joy in their work? They're a delight to work with. Quality goes up, productivity goes up. These are the things that should be nurtured. Unfortunately, they're not always. Do you agree that we can always provide a better value for our customers? Do we understand the multiplying effect of a really happy customer? Do we understand the multiplying effect of a very unhappy customer? What can be done? We're going to be talking quite a bit about that during this webinar. Do you agree that status quo is detrimental to business competitive? Status quo might make us fit for today, maybe. But is it going to make us fit for tomorrow? Things that are satisfactory today might be marginal tomorrow and obsolete the day after. We need innovation.
Do you agree that problems in your organization are solvable? That between you and your management and your workforce, that you can actually fix the problems that are there? Do you agree that your organization can stand out from everybody else, from all the competition? That is key, after all. And lastly, do you agree that your employees are a treasure trove of ideas about how to improve? And do we utilize that? One of the categories of waste is utilizing our workforce and their creativity and innovation.
I think that, Steve, I think probably most of these things we would agree with, that these are things that we do agree and we can accomplish this. So the question is that what stands in our way? And one of those things is doing things the customer is willing to pay for, okay? Waste adds cost to our products and services, what the customer is willing to pay for, and will eventually cause our customer to seek other alternatives. So if we look for the waste that's in our processes, then that's compromising our ability to deliver to our customers. And secondly, not producing products and services in the most effective way every time. Variation is present in all our processes and is virtually impossible to eliminate. Our objective is to control it within parameters acceptable to the customer. So that sounds pretty simple, you know, it's waste and variation in our processes, and they're in all of our business processes, okay? So where are they, okay? Well, waste and variation are present everywhere, but the culture that we have many times promotes the status quo and makes them invisible to the everyday observer. So that makes it extremely difficult for us to actually go after them unless we have an understanding, a better understanding of the process, and we have some tools that will help us try to find where that variation and waste exists in our processes.
So why can't we see that waste and that variation? Why did those things disappear in that last slide? Well, some of the reasons might be workarounds. You know, these are things that people do to complete their job, requirements, and in spite of a poor process that doesn't provide the necessary resources. Many times these people are seen as heroes for fixing things when really we haven't fixed the root cause. Culture. That's our way of conducting business. You know, avoids change because it's difficult, maybe painful, many times misinterpreted. What about paradigms? You know, sometimes the paradigms, that's the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see things. It's kind of our lens, if you will. Our paradigms can certainly hold us back. And then maybe all of our favorite ones, just excuses. All the reasons that we offer to explain why we're not as good as we can be. So why don't we just take a look at a few of the most common excuses that we have that probably all of us can agree. We said a few of these before. That's the way we've always done it. How about, why fix it if it isn't broken? What about, we don't have enough time to do that? Well, that's not in my job description. That's somebody else's job to fix. Let them handle it. Management won't let me do that. That's a nice, easy one to kind of put everything off of you and onto somebody else. And then, I don't know how to solve problems. Now, that's a pretty serious problem. If you have a lot of employees that literally don't know how to solve their problems, then management has to empower those employees by giving them the skills, the tools, and the knowledge to do so.
I had the opportunity back in the 1980s to study with Dr. Deming, and Dr. Deming would say the most important ingredient to improving the processes is knowledge. And then he would pause and he would say profound knowledge, knowledge that permeates the culture. Tools. We give folks tools to improve the processes and manage the processes, and we get very good at managing defects, but we're not so good at managing the processes that have made them. So this is the case.
So, you know, if you take a look at this and you say, you know, we understand that there's all kinds of excuses. We understand that we have to get waste and variation out of our processes. But as we said, because of the status quo, it's difficult for us to see it. So we got to figure out, you know, what are we going to do about this? Okay, well, as I was kind of hinting before, we have to challenge the status quo, and we have to build an environment, a culture of continual improvement. And, you know, the things that Bob just was talking about, that's one of the ways that helps us be able to see that kind of stuff. And so, you know, we got to take a different approach and do things differently if we really do want to improve our processes and stay competitive and even leapfrog past our competitors to be better than they are, be the better alternative for the customers than our competitors, I should say.
So obviously the question's got to be, how are you going to do it? And Bob started to talk a little bit about this. I'll let him talk a little bit more, but how are we going to improve ourselves? How are we going to set ourselves up for success?
Well, as I started to say, Dr. Deming would say what's needed is profound knowledge that permeates the culture, and we give them tools. And I was thinking about that for just a moment, and it was several months ago. I was feeling quite sick enough to go to the doctor, and what I wanted was a diagnosis, an accurate one, and a remedy, and I wanted it right away. And what the doctor did is pull out a thermometer. Now, that's a tool. And then he read the thermometer, and he says, your temperature is 104. That's too hot. But the thermometer didn't do anything about it. The thermometer just gave the doctor the signal, and he had to apply his knowledge. So the important thing about tools is being able to do something about it. How can people know? We give them slogans, and the slogan might say, do it right the first time. How do they know what's right? How can they do it right the first time if the system is flawed, if the material is not right, if the setup is not right? We have to give them tools, and we have to give them a system that is flawless. Dr. Deming called that the red beads in the system, the flaws in the system. We have to get them out.
Okay, Bob kind of mentioned there, one of the things we have to do is we have to get knowledge, okay? And part of the knowledge is, understanding, what do we need to know about going forward and improving our processes. One of the things that's really critical here is making sure that we do things that are linked strategically. We have to go back to our strategic plan, and we need to be working on processes to improve those processes that are strategic in nature. I've seen a lot of organizations where they'll just, go after a lot of different processes that really don't have strategic impact and wonder why we're not moving forward. So as I present here this pyramid here, you can see some of the components of a strategic plan or the mission, Why are we in business? What's our purpose for being here? Okay. Secondly, we have a vision. Where are we headed? Where are we going to be in the next 5 years, the next 10 years? Okay. Next, we have what I would call strategic objectives. And these are the critical success factors, things that we have to be the very best at if we want to beat the competition, if we want to leapfrog over the competition. We have to be really good at these things, okay? And then how do we know where we stand in achieving those? In the strategic SMART goals, this is where we bring in a time frame. We have milestones that says, okay, here's what we have to do on this time frame in order to achieve those critical success factors, those strategic objectives. So given that, the thing that we need to do is we need to articulate, or the leadership group needs to articulate, what's the area of focus? Where do we really have to focus our efforts in terms of improving so that we can achieve what we just talked about in our strategic plan? And many times that comes through developing business cases. And a business case kind of tells you high level, where do we need to focus our efforts? And this needs to permeate down through the entire organization so that we all know what things we need to work on. So, given that business case, where do we go from there? One of the first things you have to do is now you have to figure out what processes do I want to work on, okay? And I kind of take a two-tiered approach to this. One of them is what I call critical processes. And those are the things that we absolutely, positively, without question, have to be the best at. Okay, these are things that we have to continually improve. We go through cycles of improvement. Just as Bob said before, what's good today is mediocre tomorrow and downright not working, 12 months from now. We've got to continually improve these processes because we've identified them as being critical processes. The other aspect of it is the whole idea of a process hopper. We're always going to get ideas on things we need to improve, that we're going to get them from customers, possibly in the form of complaints. We're going to get ideas from our suppliers, we're going to get ideas from our employees. All these ideas of the things we should work on, we have to figure out how do we prioritize which ones to work on. So the idea of a hopper is that we kind of put them in a hopper and we develop some criteria for determining how do we get them out of a hopper, okay? And the criteria, again, relates back to the business case, because remember, that's the strategic aspect of this, and we need to be picking processes that are strategic in nature. So we have to come up with some kind of a methodology and criteria to use to get things out of the hopper. In either case, at this point, we've now selected a process to work on, okay? So the next step is we need now to define a project. We don't have a project at this point. All we have is a process that we need to work on, okay? So in developing the project, we have to go through and answer a number of different questions. The first one being, you know, what's the voice of the customer? What does the customer expect from our processes? And the difference between what the customer expects and where we are in our current state of the process represents a gap that we need to bridge in order so we have satisfied customers. And I think we all want satisfied customers because they're the ones that pay the bills. Secondly, we have to have some kind of a definition of what the problem is. What is the problem that we're working on, okay? And some kind of definition of that is going to do a very good job of helping the team understand what we have to solve. We also have to come up with some kind of a scope in terms of what we want to work on. If we looked at a process, and if you look at processes these days, they're all integrated. They all talk to each other. And if I was to just take all the paths that each process goes down, I'd be looking at the whole organization. And that becomes a little bit unrealistic that we're going to work on the entire organization on one project. So we have to define some kind of scope as to where the process starts, where the process ends, and that's the part that we're going to work on. We also have to understand at the beginning what things are out of scope, what things can't we do. For example, the leadership might say, you know, you need to work on this process and improve it, but don't think you're going to add any FTEs or full-time equivalent employees because we can't do that. Don't think that we're going to give you more money because we don't have the money. Maybe we can't even buy new software. These are things we want to know up front so that as the project team gets together to develop ways of improving the process, they don't go there because we can't do it. We can't afford to do it as an organization. Then the last thing we have to do is we have to understand, you know, what's the level of performance that we want to achieve. And we do this through the articulation of SMART goals. And these are looking back at the business case, it's looking at the voice of the customer. What's the level of performance we need out of this process in order to be satisfying the customer? And all this culminates in a project charter. All these projects need to have a project charter. When you assemble a team and bring them to work on this process, the team's going to ask you, okay, so what do you want us to do? Well, the charter answers that. That answers the question, what? Now it's up to the team to figure out how we're going to do that. And so the project charter is the defining document that helps us understand what we need to do. And this is a document that doesn't just sit on the shelf. It's an interactive process that guides us through the various aspects of our project. And so we're going to take that and through managing those projects through some kind of project management function, and that represents the tactics. We go back to the strategic plan, the tactics that we need to do in order to accomplish the goals, the milestones to achieve our strategic objectives. So I mentioned the things that we were doing there. That kind of looked at what we call the recognize and define phase. If we look at Six Sigma, what we get from Six Sigma, we get the DMAIC roadmap, DMAIC. Okay, we've kind of added a couple additional phases to that, if you want to call it. And the first one is recognize. That's where we do all the things we just talked about up until we selected before we defined a project. The strategic plan, the the selecting of strategic processes to work on, okay? And so that's where all that happens, usually by the leadership groups helping define what it is we need to work on. These are where business cases are, okay? Then we moved into the second part, which was define, and define is where we actually define the project. This is where we're going to assemble a team, and they're going to work on answering the how question to the what that was defined in the charter. The big output from the define phase is the charter, okay? So from there, we go to the measure, analyze, improve, control, and if we look at measure and analyze phases, the team is gathering data to obtain, as Bob would call it, profound knowledge, or maybe that's Deming, right, Bob, about the current state of the process. And then we have to identify what are the issues and causes that prevent the process from achieving its performance objectives, okay? Once we've kind of identified what's keeping us from doing that, we move into the improve phase, and we look and say, okay, how are we going to address those root causes? How are we going to address those issues and obstacles in the process to define a future state that will achieve the performance objectives that we're trying to achieve, okay? So as we go through this, here's where the team's really highly involved in the process improvement, okay? Then the control phase, we're trying to determine what can we put in place that will prevent backsliding. Remember, we're creatures of habit. We live right now in the status quo, and we don't want to leave the status quo because that's our comfort zone. We don't want to go into the panic zone where we have to do something different, okay? But since we're doing process improvement, we have to go to that panic zone, at least as a starting point, because we have to do things differently. So what things can we put in place to control the process so that it'll tell us when things aren't going right? It's a kind of a call to action to do something, so we get the process back on track so that we don't slide back to where we were in the beginning, the status quo. That's the last place we want to go. And then finally, in the realize phase, control of the process has to be turned over to the process owner. This is when the project is now ended. The project team is done, okay? And this now must be integrated into the day-to-day business operations. And it still has to perform at the level we designed it at. So all these things we put in place, the new process, the controls, we have to make sure that the process owner understands how to do this to maintain that level of performance. And remember, the process owner may not have been on the project team. So we have to make sure that we equip the process owner with all the tools and mechanisms to be successful and make sure that the process performs at the level that we designed it to perform at. Another key part of this, now that we've got a kind of a charter, but stepping back a minute, we have to put some kind of a structure in place, some kind of a structure that's going to help drive continual improvement through the organization. And what we've found is the steering committee concept is the way to do it. You might not call it a steering committee, but really the steering committee, or whatever you want to term it, is a group of people with hot, big titles that they're doing a lot of the stuff we just talked about and recognized. Strategic planning, they're developing business cases, they're putting together and selecting processes, strategic processes to work on, and this is the group that has to drive continual improvement and innovation throughout the organization. And depending upon your business structure, you may have an enterprise type of steering committee that has to align with a local steering committee, and those have to work together to make sure that all the things that are identified from the strategic level are cascaded down throughout the organization so that everybody is working on the things that are going to have strategic impact. All those results then roll back up and it says, here's how we are doing as an organization. You also have what I call the Kaizen support team, and Kaizen is a Japanese word that means to take apart and put back together better, okay? And in this group here is where you have your, we call it like the tools experts, the methodology experts. They may not necessarily have all the process knowledge necessary to work on a project, but they can help the project team get through the tools. understand how to run down the DMAIC roadmap. They understand that kind of stuff. So if you put the responsibility on the process owners to improve processes, they can call on this group to say, hey, I need some help in doing value stream mapping. I need some help in doing a capability analysis. Any of those types of tools that they have to bring to bear, the Kaizen support team is where the experts reside in doing that. Now, coming out of the steering committee, you have what we call champions, okay? And teams need to have a champion who acts as the liaison between the team and the steering committee or the leadership group. And they're the ones that are, these champions are the ones that have big titles, they have authority, they can remove obstacles, they can allocate resources, they can write checks if necessary. And we need this kind of a force within these project teams in order to make that happen. The champion is not someone who's on a day-to-day basis on the project team, but they're always in constant contact, and they report back in some respects to the steering committee along with the team leader. With the team leader, that's the person who runs the day-to-day operations of the project. They're making sure we schedule meetings, that we put in task lists, we make sure we have accountability and responsibility for getting things done, and they're the ones that run the day-to-day operation of the project. And you can see the next group there is the facilitators. Those are usually the people that come out of the Kaizen support team. But it doesn't have to be just the Kaizen support team. We can have people who are trained as yellow belts, green belts, black belts that are sitting in line-type operations, and they can be part of the project team as well. And then lastly, we have to put together team members. And these are people who touch the process, the people who can help us understand what is the current state of the process. They also can help us get some great ideas on how to improve the process. Remember, they're there day in and day out. We also probably throw in some people who could be what I would call subject matter experts who have some specific knowledge. Maybe if we're dealing with a union contract, we have to bring in an attorney. That's the person who understands the legal details of the contract with the union. So there might be some of those types of subject matter experts we need. And also it doesn't hurt to bring in some outside process observers. Sometimes they don't know anything about the process, but boy, they can ask some really good questions and challenge the team as they move forward to try to improve this process.
So why should we as an organization pursue continual improvement? And of course, that's also a question that the employee would have too. Well, why should we be involved in this? Do you know how good you have to be? Do you think the customer establishes that? They do not. Competition does. Those that are not meeting the customer's expectations are most likely already gone. We need to be better than the competition. So what's our burning platform for continual improvement? Can you articulate it? Can you write it down? If we as leaders can't do it, how can we expect the employees to do it? And do the employees clearly know and understand what their role is in our programs for continually improving our processes, our programs for innovation? We have prepared a template for that very thing to help you to create an elevator speech, if it will, and that's available, and we're going to be emailing that out to the folks that are on this webinar.
So let's talk a little bit about our approach. It's a closer look at our continual improvement model that we use here at Kent State. And you start with TOPS, Team-Oriented Problem Solving. TOPS was originally developed by Ford Motor Company in the 1980s. It provided a framework for identifying, solving, and preventing recurrence of problems. They used it in their 8D corrective actions. But what it really is it's how do we build effective teams? How do we build an effective structure within our organization to ensure that we are listening to these issues and that we are handling them and we are taking care of them at the shop floor level and that there is support in that. So if you think a couple slides ago when John was talking about our steering committee and Kaizen teams that are supported and other project teams that are supported by champions with team leaders in charge and then your cross-functional team members, that's really TOPS, team-oriented problem solving. And the three major methodologies, which I'm now going to talk a little bit about, we'll start with theory of constraints. None of these three methodologies really in and of themselves are individual effort and don't really have a structure for exactly how you build effective teams to do the things that they're trying to get us as organizations to change and affect. So theory of constraints, what is it all about? Well, it's really a systems-wide approach. How do we take a look at our processes from womb to tomb and see where are the weaknesses, where are the bottlenecks that are holding us back from getting more throughput of whatever it is, whether it's a service or whether it's some type of product that we deliver. Now, what about Lean? Lean is really a management and culture change approach. It also focuses on processes and systems and has us look at how are we delivering our products or services to our customers, what are they willing and not willing to pay for, and we need to find those not willing things, which usually outnumber the willing process steps, and remove those. We would call those wastes. We want to improve the velocity or the speed in our processes, and many times to improve that velocity, you need to also improve quality, which certainly is a pillar of Lean as well, but Six Sigma's focus is how do we improve the quality of our processes? Well, we have to make sure that we're on target, and we have to make sure that our variation is minimal, because the wider the variation in a process, the more unpredictable it is. And so with the three major approaches of theory of constraints, Lean, and Six Sigma not being individual effort, we need a TOPS approach to wrap around all three of those to help us to build the teams and to carry out the projects that these three approaches require. Now, let's talk a little bit more about how we operate as an organization, how we're set up. There are usually two different ways of thinking in your organization. One is that we function in silos. And we have a sales department, a purchasing department, an R&D, shipping, receiving, HR. All these function individually, and usually they have metrics to report out, maybe daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and they're measured on those. But sometimes how you measure individually isn't really the right approach, because you can look really good individually, but as a company, as an organization as a whole, are we really maximizing ourselves with our efficiencies and effectiveness, and really, how does the customer perceive us? So let's take a look at another approach of how we kind of organize our businesses. Do we organize and think of ourselves more in a value stream map approach, which is we still have these functioning departments. We still have the sales and the purchasing and the R&D and the shipping and so forth. But the reality is they need to function together, because how does the customer experience us? If you were to ask a customer how they experience us as a whole unit, as a whole system. So when we ship out a product or deliver a service to them, they feel us as an organization. They don't feel shipping department and HR and sales and customer service alone. We need to work together. And part of the working together is how do we manage our white spaces? The white spaces are the links between these silos, which we probably most often work in as we work in these silos. We need to make sure that we are managing the integration between each one of our process steps in our departments to make sure that we work well together.
So if we look at the next one of the things that we need in order to start on this continual improvement journey, it's culture. And this is going to probably be one of the most difficult parts that we have to try to accomplish. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And it happens person by person. So we got to get started now if we want to start changing the culture of our organization. And there's a lot of different things that we can do, but we got to start working on it now, because it's going to take a while. Let's put it that way. Okay, so as we cited some of the initial quotes by Einstein and Deming, We have to change in order to survive. Specifically, we have to change from a culture that promotes the status quo to one that embraces continual improvement. That means everyone, and I mean everyone from the top to the bottom of the organization, has to be participated. They have to be engaged in the process. So I listed here a couple of things that we could look at, some key elements that may be needed for a cultural type of change. Management commitment. The leadership group must commit to this new way of thinking and provide an environment where change can flourish. Number 2, management must walk the talk. This is really, really important. Leadership must be engaged and participate in the process. It's easy to say, everybody else, you do it, okay? But they have to walk the talk. They have to be engaged. They have to go see what's happening. Are we working on the right things? Are we achieving the objectives that we want for our processes? So without management walking the talk, it's just that. It's just talk. Employee awareness. All employees must understand what's in it for me. Bob mentioned this in about the 30-second elevator speech. We need to start by answering that question. We have to get the employees engaged and motivated to participate in this process and want to improve. We need to get their ideas on how to do it. I mentioned before that it's the people who touch the process who probably have the best ideas on how to improve the process. We need to tap into that. Steve mentioned management permission. Well, the leadership group has to give permission and provide the time and resources to be able to continually improve. If we say we want to improve, but we don't give everyone the opportunity to do that, then we're not going to go anywhere. It's not going to work. Visual management. The organization should utilize visual management techniques such as visual display, which basically tells us what's important in this organization, and visual control to identify a call to action. If we see that our processes aren't working the way we designed them to work, there's an indication, hey, you need to do something. You need to get this thing back on track, okay? And so everyone will now know how our processes are working and can take action when we're not achieving our objectives. We have to be a learning organization where employees are allowed to fail in order to learn. Not every project you engage in is going to be totally successful, but if we can learn from that and move forward, and now we have a better opportunity for improvement in the process because we learned something, okay? We have to have employee empowerment. Employees must be empowered to solve problems. In order to do that, in order to make that happen, they have to be taught how to do that, okay? And they have to be given the authority to stop out-of-control processes. If you just say, hey, I need you to go out and solve problems, every time I go out and talk to people, the number one response to that is, great, I don't know how to do that. So we have to take off our managers, our supervisors' hats, and put on our mentor hats, our teacher hats. We have to teach people how to do it if we expect them to actually do it. Coaches and facilitators. I kind of mentioned this before with the Kaizen support team, and the organization has to have some people, some mentors that can reach out and help people improve. We mentioned before that there's facilitators on the project teams, those individuals that understand how to use the roadmap, how to use the tools that Bob was talking about. Tools are great, but if you don't know how to use them, they're not going to really benefit you much in trying to do process improvement. And then lastly, I put up here the idea of performance reviews. Continual improvement activities must be incorporated into performance reviews in order to motivate employees to engage in the continual improvement efforts. If we don't put that as part of their performance review, they will think of that as something else I have to do. I'm too busy to do that, and continual improvement will fall by the wayside. And I think that's not where we really want to go.
So when I was talking about tools, John, just a little bit ago, and Steve, I was talking about a thermometer, and it's a wonderful tool. It tells you what the temperature is. But what's wrong with the thermometer? Nothing. It works fine. But it stops too short. It doesn't do anything about it. It's the way our performance metrics are. They tell us the status of things, but they don't do anything about it. What can be done about what we learn from these metrics? Well, I think about the tools that we use in Six Sigma and in Lean. that do something about this. Most of those were contributed by somebody trying to do something else. All the way back to the 1920s, Walter Shewhart was trying to figure out how to mass produce telephones. And he stumbled on to variation being the common enemy. And then he separated it into that caused by the system and then that caused by what people were doing to the system. Decades later, Deming labeled that as tampering with the system. Makes it worse, adds more variation. Can't think about tools without thinking about Henry Ford. What an innovator. And I love one of the things that he said. He said, if you need a machine and you don't buy it, you pay for it many times. Because you make do and you make do. How many times you got to make do until you got to buy the darn thing? And others, in the 1950s, Ono working at Toyota, it just occurred to him that more things were sitting around waiting than were in a machine having something that eventually became termed value added done to it. And he decided waiting's another common enemy. It's a time trap. And then he did something about it. Many of these greats, Joe Duran, I can't move on without at least mentioning him. He says you gotta separate the vital few from the trivial many. In other words, take carefully aimed rifle shots, shoot them and skin them and move on. Shotgun blasts aren't efficient enough. NASA and their use with the FEMA. The tools that we're using in the Lean and the Six Sigma have been crafted and honed, and they work. And we just love to be able to teach and show you how to use some of these things.
So now just from a high level view, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Lean and Six Sigma, but Bob was talking about some of the tools. Well, each one of Lean and Six Sigma and theory constraints, there's tools that have been thrown into those toolboxes that help us to carry out the high-level expectations of these methodologies. And Lean is how do we eliminate process waste? If you think about your process, just imagine, you know, flow charting your process. How many things that are you doing that don't add value? And so we have a picture with value add and then waste in a process. So Lean is about identifying those wasteful steps and then removing it so you can see a current state that is much faster, much quicker, much more efficient. Six Sigma is how do we reduce our process variation? How do we get higher level quality? So you can see a bell curve here, which is a way that we measure our process, and we see the variation in that. And then the future state is we have to do something about it. As Bob was just saying, it's one thing to have a tool or a graph that points you in a direction, but we need to do something about it. We need to make sure that we improve it so it's more on target and there's less variation. So let's talk about the blend of these methodologies. And I'll just use an example here. I'm sure many of us have called into a customer service representative, whether it be AT&T or Comcast or DirecTV or you name it, any organization where you had to call in because you had some kind of issue you wanted handled. Think about if we applied Lean and we didn't use any Six Sigma. If Lean's main focus is how do we improve the speed or the velocity of the process by reducing waste, think of all the wasteful activities that you're going to have in a call to a customer service rep. Well, there's things like long call scripts. That's the words that they use when we ask questions. Or you have unstructured scripts, so they're not really sure what to be saying, what to be doing next. Or there's dead air. There's hold times, you know, wait times. There's lots of different periods of the conversation and lack of conversation that are just waste. We need to remove those. But Six Sigma makes sure that we're doing the right things and that we're reducing the variation around those process steps. So you need Six Sigma too, but what if we applied Six Sigma without sort of a mindset of Lean? Well, then we would reduce the variation. We might reduce certain steps in the process. We might reduce the hold times or transfer times or you know, get rid of the repetition of the associates' queries and questions for us. And that's going to help. But if we leave in certain things that they're doing when they literally provide no value, then we can produce a process that has good product, but boy, is it very expensive. What we need to do is blend these together so we apply both a lean mindset and a Six Sigma or quality mindset where we're reducing steps with lean, identifying those wasteful added steps first, get rid of those, and then the ones that are left, we have to go after with our tools and knowledge of Six Sigma where we can get the highest quality. And then you add in the component of theory of constraints, which tells us every process that we have in our system, there is a weakness, there's a bottleneck, there's something that holds us back, usually one or two process steps that hold us back from getting more of whatever we want. In your customer service call, that might be the representative availability. Think of, again, how long that you wait for things. You might be on the phone for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then even when you get to somebody, you might get transferred to somebody else and wait another 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's representative availability. If we don't fix that bottleneck, then we're really not going to get any more people through our system until we can address that, no matter what we do to the upstream or downstream processes in our system.
Okay, so let me give you, just some ideas of, as we start to apply these kinds of this kind of thinking in what we do every day. Let's look at this in traditional thinking. We determine the cost to produce our products and services, and then we add an operating margin or profit to determine the price. If our cost goes up, we just increase the price. Unfortunately, probably in today's environment, that's a little less easy to do, if you want to say. So in today's environment, the price, in many cases, is determined by the marketplace or competition, for example, or regulatory bodies. If we're talking about, things in healthcare where, the prices are set by certain regulatory bodies or payors that are going to pay this. And in this case, our operating margin is determined by subtracting the cost from the price, okay? So if our cost exceeds the price, okay, we are operating at a deficit, which is less than break even, which is not sustainable in the long term. We need to attack the cost to produce the product or service in order to have some kind of an operating margin. We just can't add it on top of it. It's not a cost plus kind of a thing. And just to give you a little example, in terms of focusing our efforts, if we had a model where we had, say, $50 million in revenue, $45 million in cost, that would give us an operating margin of, what is it, 5.6 million or something like that. I can't read it. Anyways, if you look at that and we say, okay, if we were to take and reduce our cost by 10%, look what we would get in our margin. Our margin would jump to $9.5 million. It would almost double, okay? But as we look at that and say, okay, if we wanted to try to get the same type of margin by increasing revenue, look what happens. Our revenue's got to go up from 50 million to 95 million because, remember, there's variable costs associated with the cost part function of the process. Okay, so in order to get the same kind of thing, we have to drastically improve our revenues in order to get the same operating margin. So as we start looking at improving these processes, a key component that we need to focus on is the cost to produce products, cost to produce services. That's where we're going to probably get the biggest bang for our buck.
Bottom line, it's important. Return on invested capital, it's important. I was looking at those slides that John was just talking about the formula and working margins into it. And that formula has been produced or said in many different ways, but the foundation of that goes back to our selling price is equal to our cost to produce plus profits. Profits are important, the bottom line. What we're talking about here today is the lever. And the lever is our cost. How can we reduce that? This slide right here where Jack Welch says the rate of change outside exceeds, when outside exceeds change inside, the end is in sight. And it just might be. On the next slide that I wanted to talk to us a little bit about is wealth and prosperity. It's in all the books. How do you do it? We've been talking about continuous improvement for most of this webinar, and I'm going to tell you right now that's not enough. And let me tell you why I say that that is not enough. We can continually improve and continually improve processes and innovate and those kinds of things. But if we're just continually improving, we got to understand so's our competition. They're doing it. The ones that aren't doing it are probably already gone. So we got to do better. Continuous improvement is evolutionary by its very nature. And the most we can expect out of evolving is just to keep up with the competition. You don't get ahead by keeping up. You get ahead by leapfrogging the competition. That's been said here today in several different ways. And how do you do that? You do that with revolutionary improvement. We had a word for that. It was called disruptive technology. You got to disrupt the current state with the innovations in products and processes to leapfrog and to get ahead of the competition. I call this beyond continuous improvement. It's necessary. When I think about people that I admire, and there's been many, and I've mentioned some of them, but I want to mention Dr. Martin Luther King. I admire him for what he did. I admire him for the way he did it. And a quote from the doctor is, "There's the right time to do the right thing." What we're talking about here today is the right thing. And the biggest time we waste is the time we waste in getting started. And we would just love to give you a hand here at Kent State.
Okay, I really want to thank Bob and Steve and John for their time today. So they kind of gave you their take, and we talked about our approach to teaching continuous improvement here at Kent State, but why go to our programs? What makes us different than everybody else? For one, in our more than 15 years of experience in offering these programs, we have trained over 1,500 people in yellow, green, black, and master black belts. While the yellow belts are not available as an open enrollment program, they are available to be brought on site. But we do offer the green, black, and master black belt programs in an open enrollment and on-site program format. Again, our facilitators have a lot of real-world experience, not just teaching this, but putting it into use. And also, some of the requirements of the yellow, green, and black belt is a project that will contribute significantly to the sponsoring organization. On the previous slide, I failed to mention that there is typically a 38-to-1 return on investment for these Six Sigma programs. And the typical value of a participant's first project is anywhere from $50,000 to $250,000 per project. Recently, Steve certified a black belt who completed a project that is going to save their organization nearly $4 million a year. And recently, in the spring of 2017, we did complete our 55th wave of the Lean Six Sigma. Here is just a brief example of some of the different types of organizations that have sent participants through our programs. As you can see, it's a wide variety of organizations, industries, and also organization size. We've had people come through the programs from very small organizations up to huge organizations such as the government, local healthcare organizations. But this is just a good example of some of the organizations that we've worked with. These are a few testimonials from various industries that talked about our facilitators and how great they are to work with and being able to use their past experience and bring it into the classroom. If you want to read more about what our clients say about us, you can go to www.kent.edu/Lean Six Sigma. This is our schedule of upcoming programs. The Green Belt, which is coming up beginning in October, will be held in Twinsburg. The Black Belt, which begins in September, is being held at the Stark campus in North Canton, and also the Master Black Belt is also going to be held at the Stark campus beginning in October. Next spring of 2018, it kind of switches, and the Green Belt will be at the Stark campus, and the Black Belt will be in Twinsburg. So right now, what I want to do is address some questions that we typically receive from our clients when they're considering going through some of our programs. So I just want to throw this out there to the facilitators. Can you briefly explain the differences in the belts, being the yellow, the green, the black, and the master black belt?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. If we look at those different levels of certification, first of all, you know, except for the master black belt, they all require projects to be done. And as Patrick said, the yellow belt is only done on site. We don't do that as an open enrollment. And in the yellow belt, we're working on actual real business processes. The yellow belt class is 1 week long, and we go through some extensive looking at both Lean and Six Sigma tools, and on a little bit more simplistic level than you would get in the green and black belt classes. But we do look at both Lean and Six Sigma and work on real life processes to improve. The green belt, and oh, by the way, the yellow belt is a week long. The green belt is 2 weeks, 1 week a month for 2 months, and it starts to focus more and get some more input and stuff from the statistical aspect. How do we analyze data statistically? And so as part of that program, we use things like Minitab and Quality Companion to manage projects and things like that. And we use those same tools in the black belt class. And in the black belt class, the black belt class is 4 weeks, 1 week a month for 4 months. But if you go to the green belt class first, as Steve was mentioning before, if you get through the green belt, you can enter the 3rd week of the black belt class. But again, at the end, you have to go through at least 4 weeks of training in order to get certification as a black belt. If after you successfully complete the black belt program, you can move on to the master black belt program. And that, again, is 2 weeks, 1 week a month for 2 months. And not only do we get into a little bit more advanced statistics, but we also get into the idea of being mentors, and we as master black belts have to help teach and manage a group of black belts and green belts within our organization and help them to be successful in improving processes. So we're hoping to go through the very many phases that we have here, and look forward to seeing you in some of those classes.
Thanks, John. The next question, John briefly kind of touched on. Get a lot of people asking me if they need to take the green belt before they take the black belt. One of you touch on that for me?
Yes, yeah, Patrick, I'll take that one. This is Steve. Again, you're right, John did touch on this a little bit. The green belt class absolutely can be taken before the black belt program. If you're somebody who's thinking about kind of sticking your toes in the water and giving this a shot, and you say, I think green belt's where we want to start, then, you know, by all means, sign up for our green belt program. And John mentioned that if you complete the green belt and subsequently decide down the road, maybe it's right when the class is done, maybe it's 6 months later, I really want to get my black belt. I want to go on. I want to learn a little bit more about you know, these skills and tools and some deeper ones. What do I need to do to get my black belt? You will join a current black belt class at that time in weeks 3 and weeks 4. But is it necessary? The answer is no. If you decide right off the bat, I want to go get a black belt, or I know an employer I'm going to send to go get a black belt, then you do not need to complete a green belt, because the first 2 weeks of the black belt program is pretty much designed to marry straight up with what the green belts are learning in their 2 weeks of training. It's almost a 1-for-1, so that way we can jump from a green belt into a black belt program fairly seamlessly. As far as the master black belt program, you do need to be a certified black belt, either from Kent State or an approved training provider before you get into our master black belt program.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I also get a lot of questions about the project itself. We've mentioned a few times that green and black belt, or yellow even, have to complete a project in order to get certified. Can you tell us a little bit on how or what a good way to identify a potential project would be?
Yeah, I'll take that, Patrick. This is John. I mentioned in the forum when we're looking at the strategic plan, that's how we select projects that within the organization on an ongoing basis. But as Steve has mentioned and Patrick has mentioned as well, you have to do a project in order to get certified as a yellow belt, a green belt, or a black belt. And you want to pick projects that have strategic focus, but you don't want to get a boil the ocean type of project. You want to get something that you can reasonably accomplish in, say, 3 or 4 months. You want to get that one under your belt, get the practice of doing it, so that you can move on and do other projects. So you want to pick something that, as again, that's strategic in nature, but something that is got a somewhat limited scope that's going to allow you to complete this one within a short period of time. So you want to be
success breeds success.
Projects. Pardon me, Steve?
I said, as we say, success breeds success. So good to start off with something you know you can get done and succeed at.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Another question that we get is about the software requirements. We've mentioned that it's very heavy in statistics in this program. What software do you use in the programs?
So John mentioned both of them already. Minitab statistical software, and then Quality Companion or Companion by Minitab. I mentioned both of those because they're both project management softwares, but all these softwares are created by the Minitab Corporation. Quality Companion was the last version of project management software they had. When they recently went through an update, they slightly changed the name from Quality Companion to Companion by Minitab, and that just happened at the early onset of the summer. And then Minitab also went through a change from Minitab 17 to Minitab 18, statistical software. And so we use both. We use Quality Companion or Companion by Minitab to manage our projects, which has all the soft skill tools and templates, process mapping, value stream mapping, managing tasks, keeping track of meeting minutes, doing themas. All those skills and tools and templates are available in the software in a one-stop shop. And then we use Minitab statistical software to crunch the numbers and, as Bob said, point us in a direction. Use it to look at the graphs, look at the output, and say, here's what's going on. Now we need to find what are we going to do about it.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. And lastly, can we briefly touch on the certification process in general and if there is any type of tests involved?
Yeah, Patrick, this is Bob. Let me grab a hold of that. The certification process occurs once the project has been approved by the instructor and the corporation that's sponsoring the student. When the student finishes the 2 weeks for green belt or the 4 weeks for black belt, they'll get a certificate that says they've completed the coursework, but that will stop short of giving them an actual certification at the belt level. That comes with the project, and that can take several months after the classwork is done. The question regarding testing, the answer to that is yes and no. No, there's no written tests. I believe that they're pointless for this type of training. We're training practitioners. We're not training people that can answer questions and circle the right dot on the test. The test is every day, and it is being able to demonstrate in the class that you can do these things. The tools that we teach, many of them are complicated. And when we teach them, we have simulations where the students do them. And if they can't do them, we'll help them. But what I like to do is I like to get another student to help them. You ever try to teach somebody something? Who learned the most? You did. Best way to learn a subject is to teach it. And so if somebody's struggling and I can get another student that's got that technique down, why don't you go over there and help Ed a little bit? They both learn. It's better. So no, there's not a written test, but yes, there is a practical test. You got to be able to do this. We're training practitioners, not testers.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bob. Okay, well, that's about all the time we have for you. I do want to address the question of if the programs can be brought on site. Yes, we can work with you. If you have a group of folks that want to go through the program, we can certainly work with you to bring it on site and tailor it to your needs. And that goes with all the programs that we offer here at the Center for Corporate and Professional Development at Kent State. This is my contact information, my phone number, and my email address. I do work at the Kent campus, and Julie Bland is my counterpart down at the Stark campus, and that's her contact information there. And then also our website, www.kent.edu/Lean Six Sigma. Again, I'd like to thank Bob and Steve Skillman and John Novak for their time today, and I look forward to working with you and helping to initiate your continuous improvement initiative.